kidnapping and murder of the Lindbergh baby in 1932 is perhaps the most famous case of its kind. It inspired Agatha Christie to write Murder on the Orient Express in 1934. It often seems that the more well-known a historical murder is, the more various and abstruse the theories proposed by authors and investigators to solve it are. This applies regardless of whether it has actually been solved or not. The Lindbergh case suffers from overload in this respect. I've studied the kidnapping and the murder over many years, and I have, very recently, arrived at a conclusion which I believe to be very close to what occurred. Needless to say, someone got away with murder. See if you agree.
Charles Lindbergh had good reason to be satisfied with his life when he returned to his home Highfields in East Amwell, New Jersey, on the evening of the 1st of March, 1932. Following his solo transatlantic flight 5 years earlier, he was probably the most famous man in the world. He had since married well and had a 20-month-old baby, also called Charles. He was in his own vernacular, flying high. But all that was about to change. At 10 p.m. that rain-swept evening, the baby's Scottish nurse, Betty Gow, discovered Charles Junior was not in his crib. She informed Lindbergh of this, and he promptly went to the child's room. Here he discovered traces of mud on the floor and a white envelope on a radiator casing below the window, which he opened. It contained a note which, in poor English, read, "Dear Sir, have $50,000 ready, $25,000 in $20 bills, $15,000 in $10 bills, and $10,000 in $5 bills. After 2 to 4 days we will inform you where to deliver the money. We warn you for making anything public or for notify the police. The child is in good care. Indication for all letters are signature and 3 holes." At the bottom of the note were 2 unconnected blue circles, encompassing a red circle, with 3 holes punched across these horizontally. Lindbergh fetched a gun, and along with his butler, he searched the house and the grounds. Directly beneath the baby's bedroom window, they found footprints. The Hopewell Police Department and New Jersey State Police were called, and Lindbergh also contacted Henry Breckenridge, his attorney. When the police arrived, they found 2 sets of footprints leading away from the window southeast to Featherbed Lane, where it was assumed a car had awaited the kidnappers. About 45 feet along the track of footprints, they discovered a ladder which was constructed in 3 parts, the middle section being broken. A wood chisel was also discovered nearby. Incredibly, no cast or measurement of the footprints was made by police, and by the morning a stampede of sightseers and reporters had obliterated these. J. Edgar Hoover proffered the FBI's assistance in the case, and the President himself put the resources of the Department of Justice at the disposal of the Lindbergh baby kidnapping inquiry. Such was the influence and fame of Charles Lindbergh. Lindbergh insisted that he wanted to negotiate with the kidnappers himself, without police involvement, and said he wanted no arrests made before the baby was safe. Appeals were made to the kidnappers, underworld figures were contacted. Everyone wanted to help or leverage the situation for their own benefit, it seems, but the Lindberghs could only wait and hope. Then, on the 6th of March, 5 days after the kidnapping, a second ransom note arrived. It was now seeking $70,000. It gave the reassurance, "Don't be afraid about the baby. 2 ladies keeping care of it day and night." On the 8th of March, Henry Breckinridge, Lindbergh's attorney, received a third ransom note with the same distinctive signature perforations in the paper, requesting that someone be appointed to act as intermediary between Lindbergh and themselves. That same day, John F. Condon, a 72-year-old retired school principal from the Bronx, wrote to the Bronx Home News offering to act as a go-between, even offering $1,000 of his own money for the safe return of the baby. The kidnapper must have been reading the papers, because on the 9th of March, Condon received the 4th ransom note, accepting his offer to act as a go-between, and instructing him to acknowledge this by placing an ad in the New York American. Lindbergh quickly agreed to Condon doing so. Condon placed the classified ad as per instructions, reading, "Money ready, Jaffe," Jaffe being a phonetic synonym for his initials, JFC. On the 12th of March at 8:30 p.m., a taxi driver called Joseph Perrone delivered a 5th ransom note to Condon. He said the note had been given to him by a stranger, telling him to deliver it to 2974 Decatur Avenue. This note indicated that a further note would be found beneath a stone outside a hot dog stand near a subway station. Condon went to the designated place and duly retrieved the note, note number 6. In this he found instructions which directed him to Woodlawn Cemetery, where he met a man who wore a hat and coat and spoke with a German accent. The man tried to keep to the shadows, but nonetheless Condon was able to get a good look at him. He asked if Condon had the money. "I can't bring the money until I see the baby," countered Condon. "It's too dangerous," said the man, who was agitated. The appearance of someone outside the cemetery gates spooked him, and he walked off. Condon followed, and they sat on a bench together. The man told Condon he was a Scandinavian sailor called John, part of a gang of 3 men and 2 women who had been planning the kidnapping for a year. Condon requested some proof that the stranger had the baby, and John agreed to produce something for this purpose. 4 days later, on the 16th of March, Condon received a grey wool baby sleeping suit, along with ransom note number 7. Lindbergh was shown the sleeping suit and confirmed that his son had been wearing it on the night he had been taken. The kidnapper was becoming impatient, because on the 21st of March an 8th ransom note was sent demanding the ransom be paid, and this was followed by a 9th ransom note on the 30th of March, threatening to raise the ransom demand if it was not paid. $40,000 was gathered in the form of U.S. gold certificates and $10,000 in Federal Reserve notes, taking great care to ensure that all identifying numbers were recorded for future possible identification. It was also believed that the gold reserve notes, with their distinctive gold marking, would be more likely to be recalled by their recipient should they be traced. A 10th ransom note was received on the 1st of April, instructing Condon to have the money ready by the following day. It had now been 1 month since the kidnapping of baby Charles Lindbergh. The following evening, at 7:45 p.m., an 11th note was delivered by a taxi driver to Condon. It gave instructions which led to a 12th note under a table in front of a florist at 3225 East Tremont Avenue, Bronx. This time Lindbergh followed Condon in his car at a discreet distance. He had a gun in his pocket. Following the instructions contained therein, led them to another cemetery, where Condon again met the man calling himself John. Lindbergh stayed out of view, but heard the man call out, "Hey, doctor!" Condon said he wanted to know where the baby was before handing over the money. The man, John, then disappeared, saying he would return in 10 minutes, while Condon returned to the car and fetched the ransom money. John returned and gave Condon a note, and the latter handed over $50,000. That's approximately $1.1 million in 2025 terms. This 13th and final note read, "You will find the boat Nellie between Horseneck Beach and Gay Head near Elizabeth Island." The stranger, the man known only as John, then took the money and walked north from the park into the woods. It was the last that was seen or heard of him. An urgent search of the area near Elizabeth Island at dawn did not disclose the boat Nellie or the baby. Searches and appeals met with silence. The trail went cold. There was much information received, but nothing which proved to be of substance. Time slowed to a painful crawl. It was 3:15 p.m. on the 12th of May, 1932, 2 months later, approximately 2.5 miles southeast of the Lindbergh house, when Orville Wilson pulled his truck into the side of the road, near Mount Rose, New Jersey, to answer a call of nature. There, amongst some trees in a wooded area, approximately 75 feet from the highway, his assistant, William Allen, discovered a head and a foot protruding from the ground. It was the badly decomposed body of an infant child. It had been hastily covered with loose earth and leaves and other debris, which foraging animals had easily uncovered. The body was in a poor condition. An autopsy revealed the child had died from a blow to the head and had been dead for approximately 2 months. The body was identified by Lindbergh as being that of his son. He requested that the baby be cremated, and this was done without great ceremony. Charles Lindbergh was born on the 4th of February 1902, the son of Congressman Charles August Lindbergh and Evangeline Lodge. He initially attended Wisconsin University to study mechanical engineering, but dropped out and spent some months barnstorming across the Midwest as a wing walker, a popular daredevil activity for young showmen in the 1920s. He also took flying lessons, soloing in a Curtiss JN-4 Jenny biplane he had bought for $500. That's about $10,000 in 2025. In late 1923, he acquired his pilot's license, and in 1924 enlisted as a cadet with the U.S. Army Air Service, being commissioned as a second lieutenant in 1925. There were no shortage of pilots in the lean post-war years, and he was not retained as an active service pilot, but was promoted to captain in the reserve. He signed on as a U.S. airmail pilot, operating in the St. Louis area. Great strides were being made in aviation in the 1920s. Almost every month a new record was set in terms of speed, distance, or endurance, and such records brought fame and fortune to the pilots who set them. Lindbergh, a man who loved planes, loved flying, and loved attention, embarked on an ambitious plan. He conceived of a solo flight across the Atlantic. There was a prize of $25,000 for this. That's approximately $450,000 in 2025. The Orteig Prize for the first New York to Paris flight. On Friday, the 20th of May, 1927, still an unknown aviator, Lindbergh took off in his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, from a rough field in Long Island, loaded with 450 gallons of fuel, and 33.5 hours later he landed in Paris. He circled the Eiffel Tower, and a crowd estimated to be 150,000 strong greeted him at Le Bourget airfield. He was mobbed. His single-minded determination and reckless courage had paid off. His life would never be the same again. He became rich, fated. Honors were bestowed upon him, including the Légion d'honneur, and the Medal of Congress. He was promoted to colonel in the U.S. Air Force Reserve, and Time magazine named him Man of the Year. He was. He met Anne Morrow, daughter of a partner in J.P. Morgan & Co. Bank. They married in 1929 and bought a 390-acre estate called Highfields at East Amwell, New Jersey, and had the first of their 6 children, the son who had now, unhappily, eclipsed even his illustrious father in the news. The case, which had been the biggest kidnapping inquiry the U.S. had known, became its greatest murder inquiry. The news of the kidnapping had been followed keenly around the world, as keenly as had Lindbergh's transatlantic flight in the Spirit of St. Louis. But now it had come to an unhappy end. It was a bitter blow to all who hoped the child would yet be found alive and well and returned to his parents. That hope now became a grim determination on the part of law enforcement to catch the perpetrators of the deed. It was the cruelest of insults to the injuries inflicted on the family that the child was known to have died soon after his abduction, but the kidnappers had nevertheless secured the money in the pretense that he was still alive. The ransom note and the ladder had been examined for fingerprints in the early hours of the morning after the kidnapping, but nothing useful was obtained. In the baby's room no fingerprints were discovered either. There was mud near the baby's crib and on a suitcase beneath the window which the kidnapper had stood on, but no footprint was discernible. The original ransom note had been written on a piece of paper in bad grammar. Its spelling was poor, and the 12 other ransom notes had clearly been written by the same person, whom it was decided was almost certainly German. John F. Condon was sure he would recognize the man called John if he should meet him again, and working with a sketch artist, he and the taxi driver, Joseph Perrone, who had been handed a note by what appeared to be the same man, were able to produce a photofit of the suspect. A carpenter's wood chisel found near the scene suggested it had been used to gain entry to the nursery window. But without doubt, the most important evidence the police had in their possession was the ladder. The ladder was distinctive. It was homemade, but judged to have been constructed by someone who was proficient at woodworking. There were no fingerprints present, but the wood used in its construction and the nail holes were examined. These indicated that the ladder was made, in part, from a piece of wood which had previously been used for another purpose. It was carefully photographed and preserved, in recognition of the importance it might play in the investigation. That proved to be startlingly prescient. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had offered the FBI's services on the 2nd of March, but on the 13th of May, hours after the discovery of the body, the President gave it effective control of the investigation. A $25,000 reward was offered, equivalent to $586,000 in 2025, for anyone who could provide information leading to the arrest and conviction of the kidnapper or kidnappers. Banks and financial institutions, inter alia, were notified to be on the lookout for the ransom money, whose serial numbers had been recorded. A pamphlet was issued which contained the serial numbers of the bills used in the ransom payment, and 250,000 of these were issued to banks, insurance firms, and businesses in the hopes of these turning up. Many did, but they were in various locations, and no indication of who had passed the bills was obtained. It was a frustrating business. Investigators were under considerable pressure. Detectives began to suspect that the crime must have been perpetrated by someone close to the Lindberghs. How did the kidnapper know which room the baby slept in? Violet Sharp, a 27-year-old servant at Mrs. Anne Lindbergh's mother's home nearby, fell under suspicion. She had given contradictory information regarding her whereabouts on the night of the kidnapping. Subject to intense questioning, she took cyanide on the 10th of June while awaiting her fourth interrogation by police. There does not appear to be any evidence connecting her with the kidnapping, and there is a suggestion that she had boyfriend troubles. It was a tragedy within a tragedy. In this febrile atmosphere, John Condon fell under suspicion too. He was regarded by many as being much too pleased with his own place in the investigation. Scarcely a week went by without him making an appearance in the newspapers with some titbit of information or other. He sold his serialized story to the press, too. He was interviewed by police, his home searched, but nothing incriminating was found. In spite of all the efforts of the investigators, all the resources poured into apprehending the kidnapper-murderers, the man John, the case was running out of steam. Leads had been followed, information received and checked. All possible avenues of inquiry followed, but no viable suspect was found. Then the FBI received an unexpected lift to their investigation. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, as a matter of fortuitous coincidence, in the midst of the Great Depression following the Wall Street crash of 1929, decided to suspend the gold standard. He therefore issued a proclamation requiring the return to the Treasury of all gold certificates from the 6th of March, 1933. They would be phased out. This presented the FBI with a golden opportunity. As $40,000, about $930,000 in 2025, of the ransom money had been paid in gold certificates, the obvious care taken by the kidnapper to spend the money slowly over a wide area of distribution now placed him in a predicament. The gold certificates were becoming rarer, more conspicuous. It was likely, therefore, the ransomer would attempt to exchange the gold certificates for regular bills in the near future. All banks and their branches in New York City were notified to be especially vigilant for any of these turning up. On the 1st of May 1933, a man brought $2,980 in gold certificates to a Manhattan bank for exchange. That's $70,000 in 2025 terms. He had been obliged to give his name and address in changing these certificates, and had given this as J. Faulkner of 537 West 149th Street. The following day, a teller noticed that these gold certificates were part of the ransom payment. The FBI was called. There was a flurry of intense excitement, but it didn't last. No one named Faulkner lived at the given address, and a Jane Faulkner, who had lived there some 20 years earlier, had no knowledge of the matter. It looked as if the kidnapper had acquired the name and address by means of an old directory. Months passed after this hopeful interlude. The main thrust of the investigation faltered. Resources applied to it were reduced. But the tracking of the ransom bills continued. These turned up across New York City regularly, and as time went by, a pattern emerged. The bills were being spent predominantly along the route of the Lexington Avenue subway, which connected the Bronx to the east side of Manhattan. This included the German neighborhood of Yorkville. As the writer of the ransom notes was considered to be German, this was hopeful. But it remained a case of looking for a needle in a haystack. Detectives needed something to happen. They needed a stroke of luck. On the 18th of September, 1934, it came. A bank clerk at the Corn Exchange Bank and Trust Company at 125th Street and Park Avenue noticed a $10 gold certificate and identified it from its serial number as being one of the ransom bills. The FBI was called. It was regarded as being just another routine lead, but in this case the police had got lucky beyond all expectations. Penciled in the margin of the bill was a New York license plate number, 4U1341NY. Police traced the bill to a nearby gas station. The attendant there recalled having said to the man who gave it to him, "You don't see many of these anymore." "No, I have only about 100 left," replied the man. The man seemed a little nervous, and so the attendant had written down the license plate number of the car. He was worried the bill might be forged. It wasn't, but police checked the license plate registration number. It was assigned to a car which was owned by a man called Bruno Richard Hauptmann. Bruno Richard Hauptmann lived at 1279 East 222nd Street in the Bronx. He was born on the 26th of November, 1899, in Kamenz, near Dresden, in Germany, where he was apprenticed as a carpenter, and in 1917 was conscripted into the German army, and saw action on the Western Front in 1918. In 1919 he was arrested for a series of burglaries, including one in which he had used a ladder to burgle the mayor's house, and another which had involved a firearm, for which he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Following his early release in 1922, he was arrested for further burglaries and stowed away on a ship bound for New York, was deported twice as an undesirable, and finally succeeded in entering the U.S. in November 1923. Here he took up work as a carpenter, and in 1925 married a German waitress called Anna Marie Schöffler. On the 3rd of November 1933, 1.5 years after the kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh Junior, a son, Manfred, was born. They had lived at the Bronx address for several years, and the house was immediately placed under surveillance. At 9 a.m. on the morning of the 19th of September, Hauptmann left his house and got into his car. He was identified and was arrested by 3 officers. When searched, Hauptmann was carrying a single $20 gold certificate, which was also from the ransom money. A search of his garage revealed a further $1,830 hidden behind a panel, and $11,930 hidden in a shell can. A further $800 was found in the baby's nursery, and a small automatic pistol. Under intense interrogation, Hauptmann stated that the money had been left with him by a friend and former business partner called Isidor Fish. This seemed to be convenient, because Fish had not only left the U.S. and returned to Germany, but had since died on the 29th of March 1934 of tuberculosis. Hauptmann further stated that he had only learned that the case contained money after Fisher's departure, and as Fish owed Hauptmann money, he had decided to keep it. Hauptmann also said his wife knew nothing about the money and denied any knowledge of the crime himself, or that the money in his house had been the ransom money. He told a string of lies, though, constantly contradicted himself, and at one point admitted that he knew the money was the ransom money. A floorboard missing from the attic was found to match exactly the grain pattern of one of the rails on the ladder. It mated with it, showing it had been cut from the same piece of lumber. Its nail holes matched those in the joist to which it had formerly been pinned. A rough sketch for the ladder was discovered in one of Hauptmann's notebooks, too. On the 24th of September 1934, Hauptmann was charged with extorting $50,000 ransom from Charles Lindbergh, and subsequently indicted in New Jersey for the murder of Charles Augustus Lindbergh Junior. He was held at Hunterdon County Jail to await his trial. The trial of Bruno Richard Hauptmann began on the 3rd of January 1935 at the courthouse in Flemington, New Jersey, before Judge Thomas Trenchard. It lasted for 5 weeks. Edward J. Riley, a pugnacious and highly successful defense attorney, was appointed for the defense, and David T. Willents, Attorney General of New Jersey, led for the prosecution. The evidence against Hauptmann included the $14,000 of ransom money found at his home, and testimony from handwriting experts, including Albert S. Osborne, that the handwriting, spelling, and other features of Hauptmann's writing were demonstrably the same as those of the ransom notes. One of his carpentry chisels had been found in the Lindbergh grounds. The ladder found near the scene had been constructed partially from a plank missing from Hauptmann's attic, and Condon's address and telephone number were found written in pencil in a closet at Hauptmann's home. Hauptmann was identified by John Condon as being the man to whom the ransom money was delivered, and Joseph Perrone also picked him out as being the man who had given him $1 to deliver a note to Condon. Other witnesses testified that it was Hauptmann who had spent the Lindbergh gold certificates. A man called Amandus Hochmuth, 87-year-old veteran of the Franco-Prussian War, who lived nearby, said he saw a car like Hauptmann's with a ladder inside it going towards the Lindbergh house on the morning of the 1st of March. He identified Hauptmann as being the man driving the car. 2 other witnesses testified that they had seen Hauptmann in the Hopewell area on the day of the kidnapping. Lindbergh identified the voice of the man he had heard in the park calling out, "Hey, doctor," as being that of Hauptmann, and the prosecution showed that Hauptmann had been absent from work on the day of the kidnapping and had quit his job the following day. Hauptmann never worked again, yet continued to live comfortably, had spent $400, $9,500 in 2025, on a radio set, and paid for his wife to visit Germany. The purpose of this visit was to check if her husband was still a wanted man in Germany. One further damaging piece of testimony came from a neighbor and friend of the Hauptmanns, called Ella Achenbach, who told the court that the couple had been on a trip on the day of the kidnapping, and when they returned, Hauptmann had an injured leg. He was unable to walk down the stairs without assistance, and limped as he walked down the road. In court, as if by prompt, Anna Hauptmann shouted out, "You are a liar, Mrs. Achenbach." Such was the prosecution case. Ed Riley, for the defense, opened with a lengthy examination of his client, Hauptmann. Hauptmann denied all charges, insisted the box of gold certificates had been left in the garage by his friend Isidor Fish, who had returned to Germany in December 1933, where he had since died. He claimed he had found a shoebox left behind by Fish, which he discovered contained $40,000. $930,000 in 2025. Hauptmann had kept the money for himself and had lived on it since January 1934, he said. The defense called Hauptmann's wife, Anna, to corroborate the Fish story, but under cross-examination she was forced into the position of admitting that she could not remember seeing any shoebox there. Worse, rebuttal witnesses testified that Fish could not have been at the scene of the crime and that he had no money for medical treatments when he died of tuberculosis. Fisher's landlady testified that he could barely afford the $3.50 weekly rent. Asked why he had written Condon's address in the wardrobe, Hauptmann said, "I must have read it in the paper about the story. I was a little bit interested and keep a little bit record of it, and maybe I was just on the closet and was reading the paper and put it down the address. I can't give you any explanation about the telephone number." He said the sketch of the ladder found in the notebooks was the work of a child. Concerning the handwriting, he said police had beaten him to make him write like the ransom letter writer. Edward Riley made his final address to the jury, saying that the evidence against Hauptmann was entirely circumstantial. No reliable witness had placed Hauptmann at the scene of the crime, nor were his fingerprints found on the ladder. on the ransom notes or anywhere in the nursery. He suggested that Condon and Fish were the real culprits. On the 13th of February 1935, the jury retired to consider their verdict, and returned 11 hours later to find Hauptmann guilty of the kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh Junior. Trenchard sentenced Hauptmann to death. His attorneys appealed, and this was heard on the 29th of June 1935 and denied. Hauptmann had garnered some sympathy with the press and with the public, and his wife, a strong woman who figured prominently in the trial and the press accounts, garnered much admiration for her strength of character and loyalty to her husband. New Jersey Governor Harold G. Hoffman secretly visited Hauptmann in his cell on the evening of the 16th of October. He urged him to give up his accomplice or accomplices and tell all he knew. In late January 1936, Hoffman stated publicly that the crime was not a one-man job and directed police to continue their investigation until all parties involved were brought to justice. On the 30th of March 1936, Hauptmann's second and final appeal was denied. At 8:44 p.m. on the 3rd of April 1936, he was strapped into the electric chair, and the lights dimmed at Trenton State Prison as a current of 2,000 volts were passed through Hauptmann's body. Since the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, a great many books, essays, and articles have been written on the case. It is customary and common in cases which attract a great deal of public attention, and in which publications have exhausted the facts, but not the public fascination, for authors and investigators to seek new explanations. There have been no shortage of these over the years, which have sought to square the impossible circle. They claim Hauptmann was innocent, cite witness tampering, planted evidence, new witnesses, new suspects, new evidence in support of this. It is strange that the case against Hauptmann has continued to attract speculation, often of an absurd kind, when the case against him is so compelling. The reasons for this are various. The Lindberghs were not regarded sympathetically. They appeared to be cold, aloof, privileged people. They were. The Hauptmanns were seen as poor immigrants up against an elite system, and the press and public especially sympathized with Anna Hauptmann, the determined and loyal wife and mother of a child much the same age as the Lindbergh baby. The sympathy for the dead child was transferred in a mysteriously illogical but understandable way to the Hauptmann child. Anna's insistence that her husband was a victim of an elite malign justice system struck a chord with people then, as it does today. Publicity-hungry men like John Condon and the politically ambitious attorney Willents drew the ire of press and public alike. Lindbergh's career following the trial, which saw him advocating eugenics, promoting beliefs that breeding of the superior races, of which he regarded himself as being a prime example, was the key to the preservation of America, tarnished him. And his support for Germany and its ideologies up until 1942 produced a powerful backlash against both Charles and Anne Lindbergh. By 1940, they were toxic. Such things have led writers to place Lindbergh in the spotlight of suspicion. Could he have been involved in some way with his own son's death? It has been claimed that his son did not fit his ideal of the superior race he believed in, that he had a large head, rickets, and other physical problems. I can see no signs of these whatsoever in the photographs we have of him. All those who knew the baby said he was a normal, healthy child. It seems to me that writers seeking to find motive for Lindbergh killing his own son have invented these. The discovery in 2003 that Lindbergh had fathered 7 children by 3 different German women in the 1950s and 60s has led to an increase in accusations against him. None of the 7 illegitimate children knew their father by his real name, and he visited them only occasionally. Lindbergh undoubtedly had many flaws, many beliefs which, today in particular, are regarded as anathema. But can we extrapolate from such things to suggest him capable of murder? And beyond this, to suppose he was responsible for his own son's death? We want a man like Lindbergh to be the villain. He fits the casting bill in so many ways. A priggish, bigoted, humourless, self-opinionated man whose sole lifelong interest was himself and his own importance. But I can find no evidence, even so, to connect Lindbergh with the death of his own son. Being a terrible person does not a killer make. If it was so, crime detection would be easy. There are a great many theories concerning the Lindbergh kidnapping, and it is impossible to review them all or consider them all. Some are convincingly argued, suggesting any one of an assortment of characters known and unknown in the case. They all, in my view, pander to a certain type of audience in the true crime genre, and suffer from the shared characteristic defects of amplifying a few slender truths, or half-truths, or even falsehoods, to promote theories which wilfully ignore the bedrock of evidence in the case. There is no doubt that Bruno Richard Hauptmann kidnapped and killed Charles Lindbergh Junior on the 1st of March 1932. There are too many proofs of it. These are: 1. The ransom money was discovered in Hauptmann's garage and his house. His claim that his friend Fish had left it there was not remotely believable, nor was it possible. Fish was a convenient stooge for Hauptmann. He had left the country for his German homeland, and he was dead. But his landlady attested he could not afford to pay her a meagre rent. He was sick. He was unable to work. If he had the means of alleviating his difficulties, he would have done so. But he didn't. He didn't because he couldn't. 2. No one other than Hauptmann received any of the ransom money. $50,000 was paid to the man, John. $16,000 was identified in Hauptmann's assets. $7,000 identified in losses. $14,590 was found in the garage and house. $5,100 in bills had been spent around New York City, and Hauptmann himself said he had made Fish a loan of $7,500. This brought the grand total to $50,190. Hauptmann alone had all the ransom money. 3. The day of the kidnapping, Hauptmann was absent from work. The following day he quit his job. He never worked or sought work again. Why? He had another source of income long before Fish had supposedly left his box with him. He paid for his wife to travel to Germany. He bought expensive items and lived well after the kidnapping. If he had another source of income, even an illicit one, like burglary, then he had the strongest possible incentive to disclose that, with the death sentence hanging over his head. But he didn't. He had no explanation for his wealth in the 2.5 years since the kidnapping. 4. On the day of the kidnapping, at least 3 people saw Hauptmann in the Hopewell area. One, Amandus Hochmuth, saw him in his car with a ladder. 5. The ransom note appears to have been written by Hauptmann. Handwriting is the weakest of all proofs, should only be regarded as corollary evidence. In this case, it hardly requires a handwriting expert to decipher it. It suggests strongly that Hauptmann was the author of the notes. 6. Condon identified Hauptmann as being the man he met twice as part of the negotiations concerning the kidnapping. Others identified Hauptmann as being the man who cashed the ransom bills in the 2.5-year period following. The taxi driver, Joseph Perrone, attested Hauptmann was the man who had given him one of the ransom letters. The photo-fit sketch of the man John is as close a likeness as one could wish for. 7. Condon's name and phone number were discovered written in a closet. Hauptmann admitted to writing them, but claimed to have written them there merely from interest. It will not do. 8. Ella Achenbach said Hauptmann had injured his leg after an absence on the 1st of March. In consideration of the broken ladder, the implication is that he had fallen from this during the kidnapping and injured himself. "She is lying," shouted Anna Hauptmann. But she wasn't. Why? Because Hauptmann's physician, a Dr. Otto Meyer, made an affidavit that Hauptmann had visited him on the 2nd of March, the day after the kidnapping, for treatment to an injured leg. On that occasion he told the doctor that he had fallen off a ladder. It is a proof of Ella Achenbach's story in this respect. 9. A woodworking chisel found at the crime scene matched a set of chisels which Hauptmann owned. 10. Then there is, without question, the most damning piece of evidence of all, the ladder. It was a distinctive ladder, and from the first it was understood by detectives that it had been constructed by someone proficient in woodworking. Hauptmann was such a man. He was a carpenter by trade. The distinctive milling marks on one piece of the lumber revealed that it had been milled by the same machine that milled the floorboards nailed to the joists in Hauptmann's attic. The grain showed it matched, by extrapolation, another board in Hauptmann's attic. The nail holes in a piece of the timber used to make the ladder lined up exactly with a joist from which a board was missing in Hauptmann's attic. In working the board in the construction of the ladder, a plane had been used with its own signature marks and deviations in the blade. These matched precisely those of Hauptmann's plane. All of this supplies the means, the motive, the opportunity. It is, a fortiori, beyond the scope of reasonable human doubt, that Bruno Hauptmann kidnapped the baby Charles Lindbergh on the evening of the 1st of March, 1932. There is only one mystery in this story. That is, did Hauptmann work alone? From the beginning it was thought he had not. Hoffman, the New Jersey governor, who visited Hauptmann in prison, was sure he did not. Others believed this too. It is claimed that Hauptmann was offered a reprieve from the electric chair if he gave up his accomplice, but he didn't. It is often said that Hauptmann could not have done this alone. It seems to me that Hauptmann could have done this alone. After all, he had all the ransom money, but that he did most assuredly have an accomplice for it. There are several reasons for saying this. First, there were 2 sets of footprints leading from the ground beneath the nursery to the lane. The clear inference here is that there were 2 people there. Second, the ladder was found broken 45 feet along the footstep trail to the lane. Was the kidnapper carrying the baby and the ladder, along with any other tools used? It seems doubtful. Third, the act of kidnapping a baby from the upper story of a house is a perilous undertaking. A lookout on the evening would seem to be indispensable. Fourth, Hauptmann must have realized the baby would wake up, that babies make a lot of noise when they do, and that alone would raise a terrific alarm in the house. He needed an associate to give their full attention to the infant. And finally, fifth, there is one irrefutable proof of an accomplice. If you accept, as I believe we must, that Hauptmann did not intend to kill the baby, then you are bound to accept that he had an accomplice, for the simple reason that he was going to need someone to look after the baby until the ransom was paid. It does seem clear that the killing was unintentional, because if killing had been Hauptmann's intention, then he would have prepared or found a better burial site. As it is, it was hastily selected, far too close to the Lindbergh home, was covered with a smattering of soil and debris. Its discovery was only a matter of time. Police thought then, and it has long been understood among students of the Lindbergh kidnapping case, that the baby died as a result of a fall from the ladder. The ladder, when found, had its middle rail broken. It suggests that it broke during Hauptmann's awkward and now heavier descent from it. If that is so, then the kidnapper's intention was to keep the baby and exchange it for the ransom money. That would mean that Hauptmann's accomplice, or one of his accomplices, needed to be a woman. Who? The obvious candidate for this is his wife, Anna. After all, he needed someone who might be seen with a child without causing a stir, just the wry, sympathetic smiles of strangers if they should be stopped in the car. She could take care of the child in their house, which was sufficiently remote from neighbours for this. It is surprising no one inquired further into the anomalies of her position. She was there, his accomplice, hiding in plain sight. Consider. Ellen Aschenbach said husband and wife had been on a trip on the 1st of March. If that is correct, then they were together on the day of the kidnapping. Ella said Hauptmann had injured his leg during the trip. "She is lying," called out Mrs. Hauptmann, surely at the defence attorney's instigation. He knew what Ella was about to say, and he had the antidote to it. He was an extremely wily, experienced lawyer, New York's most successful defender of people charged with murder. In court he knew the value of such interventions, and proved this when Joseph Perrone identified Hauptmann as being the man who had given him a ransom note. "He is a liar," said Hauptmann. Riley asked the judge to ensure his client's words were made a part of the record. The judge and prosecutor said they did not hear Hauptmann's words. Riley was most insistent. "The press did," he said. "Ask them." He had briefed his client and was not going to have his efforts wasted. There was no good reason for Ella Aschenbach to lie about the couple being away on the 1st of March, and Hauptmann having injured himself when she saw them on their return, and Dr. Meyer's affidavit concerning Hauptmann seeking treatment the following day for an injured leg, which, he told the doctor, was the result of falling off a ladder, confirms that Ella was telling the truth. That being so, it is a clear indication that Mr. and Mrs. Hauptmann were indeed away together on the 1st of March, 1932. And consider Anna's apparent ignorance. Did she know nothing of her husband's activities? He had served prison time in Germany, was an habitual offender. She had travelled to Germany to establish whether he was still a wanted man there. Anna was a central figure during the trial. She was clever, manipulative, always ready to talk to the press, be seen with their young son, Manfred, adamant that her husband was innocent. But when he quit work at the time of the Lindbergh kidnapping, where did she think he obtained his wealth from? He bought a radio for $400, $9,500 in 2025, yet she did not inquire how her out-of-work carpenter husband could afford such a luxury. None of the neighbours could, and they all worked. A shoebox filled with money was claimed by Hauptmann to have been left above the place where she daily hung her apron. Did she not notice it, wonder what was in it? Apparently not. At the very least, she knew he was a thief, and a very successful one. And if we concede this, then why did she protest his innocence so vehemently for so long? Did she not think it peculiar that her husband had written the address and phone number of Condon on a wardrobe interior? Even if she knew nothing of it before Hauptmann's arrest, what did she make of it afterwards, and his admission that he had written it? Had she never seen the ladder he was constructing? He could hardly have constructed this at work, because it would have been recognized, attracted comment from workmates. If he made it at home, then his wife would have seen it, unless he constructed it in her absence and concealed it. but he had made it from a board in his attic. It was probably in use daily for household chores. She must have known the ladder was his. It was in newspapers all around the world, and she, better than anyone, would recognize her husband's handwriting. They had been married for 9 years at the time of his arrest. Would she not recall his return on the night of the 1st of March, 1932, deeply shaken at what had occurred, a badly injured leg? And what of his obsessive poring over the newspapers in the days that followed? Newspapers that told of the kidnapping of a baby, a distinctive ladder against a wall, various ransom notes from an unknown German. If Hauptmann had an accomplice, then they never got paid for it, because Hauptmann is the only person to whom any connection with the money was established. All of the $50,000 was accounted for and linked to Hauptmann. And yet the FBI found there was $3,775, that's $90,000 in 2025, deposited at Steiner, Rouse & Co. brokerage in the name of Anna Schöffler, and $2,578, about $60,000 today, in a joint central savings bank, Broadway. That is a total of $130,000 in today's terms in Anna's name or jointly with that of her husband. She was under investigation by the IRS for these. It is clear that their financial affairs were inextricably related and complex, and she was fully complicit in concealing large amounts of money. There is another telling reason why, if Hauptmann had an accomplice, it would be his wife. He had the chance of reprieve if he identified his accomplice. He surely would have complied with this under almost any circumstance, except the one in which his accomplice was his wife, the mother of his son. In this case he could do nothing but continue to protest his innocence. He could justify this to himself, as could his wife, on the basis that the death of the baby Charles was not a murder, it was an accident. Never mind that it was an accident that occurred during a kidnapping. But why would Anna deny so vociferously, long after he was dead, that her husband had any involvement in the crime? To some it has seemed that it represents her absolute belief in his innocence. But there can be no question, in the face of the evidence against Hauptmann, that she, better than anyone else, would have known of her husband's guilt, even if she was not involved as an accomplice. She would have known it from all of the foregoing, and 1,000 other things it is pointless to labour. She denied it because she was his wife, of course, but she also denied it and continued to deny it because to do so was the best possible means of avoiding the logical, the inevitable follow-up question. What did she know about it? Had she ever admitted her husband's guilt, it would have led to questions concerning her own involvement. Psychologically, the denial of her husband's guilt over many years meant the question never devolved to her. Human beings are strange creatures. They are adept at constructing a narrative and sticking to it, even convincing themselves of its being true at a certain level. I suggest that it was the case with Anna Hauptmann. I am convinced that she was, at the very least, an accessory before and after the fact, and probably his accomplice. Hauptmann was a thief. In Germany he had a raft of offences against his name, had served 1 prison sentence. He absconded while awaiting trial for a slew of further robberies, and stowed away to the US to evade police in Germany. It is difficult to imagine that he would change course on arrival at the US. He spoke to a workmate about criminal schemes to get rich, robberies, hold-ups, and even mentioned kidnapping. His mind worked that way. He certainly worked as a carpenter. It was his trade, and he married Anna Schöffler in October 1925. It is probable that Hauptmann continued burglary. His other trade, throughout this period too. He told Condon during that first meeting that the gang to which he belonged had been planning the kidnapping for a year. That was probably true in part. Such things take time, and his mind was fixed on this, a daydream at first, and grew to a possibility, a plan. He worked it out in detail in his mind. He saw that Lindbergh had become a very wealthy man. He also learned where he lived, and that he had a son. In 1931, the Lindberghs had Highfield built, a place to get away. How Hauptmann learned of it, we do not know, but jobs in construction pass by word of mouth amongst tradesmen, and it is the most likely way in which he would hear of it. He heard of it, and he was interested. Hauptmann and his wife were struggling financially. After the Wall Street crash of 1929, money was tight everywhere. They were hard times for most people. Hauptmann resolved upon the most audacious plan, one which would set him up for life. It may have begun simply as a plan to rob the wealthy Lindberghs while they were away. That was his usual form. But observing the house during recce visits, he learned of the nursery, doubtless inspected the windows and their fastenings. Always an eye for the main chance, he saw that the kidnapping was a far bigger prize than a few $100 cash and some silver. He settled upon kidnapping the son of the most famous man in America, demanding a ransom which the man could certainly pay, would have to pay. He was a professional burglar. He had entered many houses, perhaps hundreds in his career. He had been caught a number of times, but burglars, like all criminals, are nature's optimists. They always believe they will get away with it. Hauptmann's plan was simple. He would drive to the Lindbergh house, 80 miles away, place the ladder up to the nursery window, and climb this. Using a wood chisel he had brought for the purpose, he would prise open the window, enter the room, take the baby, and exit by the same means, depositing an envelope with a pre-written ransom note in it on the window-sill. So far so good. But Hauptmann needed an accomplice. To handle a baby and remove it from the property alone would be fraught with all kinds of difficulties, and Hauptmann was a man who had thought this through. He needed an accomplice as a lookout, while he disassembled the ladder and removed to the car 1/2 mile away. And most of all, he needed an accomplice who could look after a baby. He needed a woman. That is implicit when he tells Condon he is part of a gang of 3 men and 2 women, and when he later tells Condon that the baby is being cared for by 2 women. It is abundantly clear to him as to Condon, even when he is making up a story, that a woman must be involved. It had the added advantage of keeping the matter, which required great confidentiality, between himself and Anna. In this way he could discuss his plans with her and rehearse the plan without constraint or fear of discovery. The plan seemed foolproof, but it wasn't. There is no such thing. Hauptmann visited the house several times. He eyed it as a professional thief. He noted the locks on the window. He observed the nursery. He saw the style of window, its wood construction, and its fitments with a carpenter's expert eye. It was insecure. A chisel judiciously applied would open it at a single wrench. The nursery was situated at the corner of the house, a propitious place at which to approach, nearest the perimeter. The escape was assured. How did he know it was the nursery? It was obvious. The decor, the decorated partition, visible opposite the window by binoculars. Hauptmann drove to the Lindbergh house and parked. That must have been the trip Anna and her husband made, an absence she felt obliged to give account of to Mrs. Aschenbach. If Hauptmann was at Lindbergh's house before noon, as Hochmuth and others claimed, then he was there or nearby, by necessity, all day. And so was his wife, because she told Mrs. Aschenbach she was with him. He had a ladder, and he had a gun, just in case. The gun being found with some of the ransom notes suggests that the gun was part of his toolkit and played a part in the operation. It was raining. Hauptmann moved with accustomed stealth towards the house, his wife in breathless company. Here he slotted the ladder together, placed it against the wall, tested it. A glance at Anna. He climbed up to the window, and chisel in hand he pried open the window. It gave, as he knew it would, burst the catch off its stay, easily. He knew windows. He knew the place to pry a chisel with most effect. He paused on the ledge for his eyes to become accustomed to the dark, listened, heard distant sounds in the house above the wind and the rain, then dropped silently to the floor and moved to the crib opposite. The baby breathed, and he lifted it from its cot, gathered its blanket. It stirred a little. He returned to the window and climbed up to the ledge via a suitcase. Crouched precarious there, deposited the letter on the ledge. He had no children, was not used to handling a baby, and climbing from a window and down a ladder with one is hazardous, especially in a state of panic during a break-in. His heart was pounding now. The baby stirred. Perhaps it cried. That piercing wail which babies possess, tuned purposely to reach the ears of its mother. The sound to him must have been more perilous than the sound of an alarm shrieking to the night. He stepped out onto the ladder, unstable, unnerved. He slipped on the wet rung, and he fumbled the baby. The ladder bent, broke, clattering to the ground. He and the baby fell. Lindbergh said he heard a crash at about 9 o'clock, which sounded like an orange box falling off a chair in the kitchen. Hauptmann heard the heavy sound of the baby upon the ground beneath, and knew what it meant, even as he crashed to the floor himself. It was unmistakable, a hard smack. His wife at the ladder's foot, aghast. He was injured, the pain masked by shock and terror. The baby was still. Was it? No. Now he was in full flight mode. Anna picked up the baby, now ominously silent. It might be all right. All his careful plans were abandoned. The chisel was dropped. He collected the ladder, and they fled. He was struggling, in pain, limping. He could imagine people behind him giving chase. Surely they heard the crash. He abandoned the ladder. In the car the scene must have been terrible. The worst possible catastrophe had occurred. The baby they had taken, had sought for ransom to make their fortune, was very still. Hauptmann, cursing in German, fired the engine, and the car lurched forward in first gear, the world spinning before his eyes, Anna with the baby in her arms. They drove, the house receding behind them. Is the baby okay? It's not moving. Is it dead? I think so. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. They could not take the baby home now. The only thing worse than being caught with a kidnapped baby is being caught with a dead kidnapped baby. They had no place to dispose of it. What could they do? They stopped a short distance away on the road, an ill-considered place, pulled in at some trees, and Hauptmann and his wife in the darkness went as far into the trees as they could. Working blind, scraped a hollow with all the haste panic can muster, and removing the sleep suit, placed the baby there, kicking the loose earth and leaves over him to conceal as best they could the terrible thing they had done. It was inadequate, but it was the best they could do. They drove off, escaped. In the morning the newspapers were filled with the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. Nothing more was known. It induced a little calm in them. They would lie low. It had gone wrong, terribly wrong. But it was not their fault, they reasoned, because a ruthless, self-serving logic had taken hold of them. There was nothing implicating them. The police had no idea. Their neighbors were the same cheerful people, waving across the fence, complaining about the weather. "We've been on a trip," Anna told Mrs. Aschenbach. "Richard has injured his leg." Richard limped, shrugged at some tale of clumsy misfortune. His leg was bad, though, and he saw Dr. Meyer, told him he had fallen off a ladder the previous day. There was no reason to lie to him. The newspapers were full of the kidnapping. A ransom, they said. It would be paid, declared Lindbergh. Now Hauptmann, an avaricious and habitually dishonest man, looked at his wife. He had a new thought. No one knew the baby was dead. They might still obtain the ransom. There are many ways to skin a cat. "Leave it all to me," he said. As he combed the papers to see what was known, he saw a well-known Bronx character called Condon was offering to act as a go-between. He waited several days before contacting him. His leg was still bad. They met. He did his best to keep Condon from seeing his face. He misdirected him concerning his accent. He was Scandinavian, he said, a sailor. He was neither. He was part of a gang, he said. He wasn't. The baby was held on a boat and was safe. The baby was dead. He needed to progress this matter as fast as possible. Who knew how long the dead baby would remain hidden? But as the days go by, his confidence increases. Criminals are optimists. They have to be. He got the money and more than readily took the 50,000, and then he was gone. Hauptmann quit work. People must have queried their newfound wealth, but they weren't stupid over it. They were judicious in their expenditure. Hauptmann claimed he was dealing in stock, but Hauptmann's lack of occupation was winked at. He was a rogue. He was up to no good. A bootlegger, perhaps. No, he was something far worse. Hauptmann was careful. He used his bills and certificates judiciously. He cashed them in every day, just a $10 or $20 note. He usually bought something small, took the change and banked it, or bought stocks. "I'm in stock trading," he told people. He was laundering the money. Police awaited only a stroke of luck, and finally it came. Hauptmann was arrested. Lindbergh went on after the tragedy of his son. He doesn't seem to have moderated his views, and time did not gentle his condition. He died in 1974 of cancer, and 10 days before his death he wrote to the 3 women who had borne him 7 children between them, asking them to keep the secret he shared only with them, even from their children. They did. A strange man, a unique man, a much flawed man. The fault is in ourselves. We make gods of men too willingly, are disappointed to find they are only human after all. We wish our heroes to be perfect. When they are not, we are angry. They have disappointed us. Lindbergh is a disappointing hero. His astonishing, single-minded determination, one long day and dark night, skimming the Atlantic waves in a single-engined, high-winged monoplane, made his fortune. It made him famous, gave loft to opinions he held which should have remained grounded. He came to believe his own publicity. Ultimately, it led to his ruin. Anna Hauptmann, the widow, sued the state of New Jersey in the 1980s twice for the wrongful execution of her husband. She was not successful. She never veered from the assertion that her husband was innocent, even in the face of all the evidence to the contrary. If she was his accomplice, and it seems to me quite impossible for her not to have known of his involvement, then she relied on that same self-serving logic her husband did. They had never wished to harm the baby, simply to extort money from Lindbergh. We saved the best lives for ourselves. Anna Hauptmann died in 1994. She was 95 years old.